says that this is on.
Yes.
It is.
Lillian had those kind of shoes that blink on and off when you step. The very first time those came out, my nephew was selling them, and it was on Christmas Eve in my carriage that half my acolytes had. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. It is so good to be back in this pulpit here at St. Martin's.
Amen.
For those who have known me to preach extemporaneously, I have finally come to that place in my life when I'm beginning to lose words. I'll get ready to say something and I can't get the word out. So I'll be working from a text, and here in the pulpit, it will be much better. It will make the sermon shorter. Not likely. I'd like for us to take a look at the gospel reading for today. It really is two stories wrapped in one. It's easy to choose one of the readings, but Mark embeds one of these stories in the other, and because of this little literary device, we are invited to look at the embedded one more closely. First, it's important to look at what Jesus is saying and doing in this passage. Jesus was in an area that was religiously diverse. He was in northern Galilee. It was not a majority Jewish community. Then there's also in the first story of the 12-year-old daughter, the leader of the synagogue, Jairus. And the other one is the story of a Gentile woman who'd had a hemorrhage for 12 years. Even though the story of Jairus' daughter is a story of resurrection, because of how the story is constructed, it tells me that the important part of this passage lies in the story of the Gentile woman who reaches out to touch Jesus. I bring you to mind that the number 12, always in the New Testament, is a metaphorical number. When you hear the number 12 in the New Testament, it's always associated with the coming of the Messiah. So Mark is letting us know this story is about living in the kingdom where resurrection and even healing will be needed. It is in a time when everything is going to be balanced. Jesus came to heal, yes. But more importantly, Jesus came to renew the faith as it was practiced in Israel. He was neither a conservative nor a progressive. So it isn't a matter of red and blue. He was just plain radical. He wanted to get back to the roots. That's what radical means, getting back to the roots of faith in God. Not just the observance of the law. Not just the observance of the law of Moses. The root was love of God and love of others. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second law is love your neighbor as yourself. There are no commandments greater than these. There's one thing about right two. We don't say that as a normal passage. In right one we do every Sunday. But in right two, we don't. And I think it's something we need to remember. It needs to be spoken. That's the center of our faith. And what we see in these stories is not a new gospel. Jesus didn't preach a new gospel, but a reclaiming of what was central to the people of Israel's relationship with God. It is my opinion that Jesus did not come to start a new religion, but to draw all into the realm of God, not just Jews, not Gentiles, but everyone. In the first century Judaism, how one obeyed the law labeled you as one group or the other. How you followed the law told what group of Judaism that you followed, kind of like denominations today. What's important. But to be righteous, or to be tzedek, as it says in Hebrew, you must be balanced. Some followed the letter of the law, every jot and tittle. Some, and especially those farther away from Jerusalem, followed the laws spiritually or allegorically. The word tzedek is that sense of balance, that sense of righteousness, that sense of being okay with God. And faith was a balanced relationship with the Holy One and with humanity. Now, in this story, the Gentile woman was a woman who had tried everything to be healed. She was shunned and was considered sinful because of a hemorrhage, because the woman was unclean. Touching such a person rendered a man unclean, unable to enter a synagogue, unclean to celebrate Shabbos or the Sabbath without a trip to the ritual baths. So this encounter takes all the temerity of this woman to reach out to the rabbi. She desires to be healed of her illness. She had to reach across the societal customs of her society. This is one story in which Jesus does not initiate the healing. The woman does. She claims a faith in this man who has not even seen her. And Jesus confirms her healing, saying, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." He returned her life to balance, to acceptability, and removed the shame that her society had heaped upon her because of her illness. Jesus stepped into the real meaning of Mosaic law, to bring wholeness, to bring balance, to bring healing despite all the rules and expectations of how one was supposed to act. Jesus stepped over the partitions and the boundaries of normal expectations so that God's work could be seen. This is what I believe Mark is trying to tell of the ministry of Jesus. Now, the Gospel of Mark is the first book written, and the oldest, and in some ways the most revealing of the person of Jesus. I take heart in this story of the woman with the hemorrhage, because I can hear so much of this story that speaks of my life and the balance and the willingness not to wait to know acceptance in God, but to reach out and to claim when we don't look like everyone else. The other thing about this story is that it has so much meaning for our own day. There's a temptation to think that this is a girls-only story. I can't tell you how many times male preachers have passed this lesson off to women in my career. It has to do with the kind of healing of all those deep places. Those places that sometimes we even think as icky. Those places we don't want to look at. David Luce, a Lutheran pastor and teacher, refers to this icky place as our deepest vulnerability. It is that place where we try to avoid looking at ourselves and refuse to talk about it, afraid that others would be horrified if they knew. And consequently, we often never become healed because we can't look at it. It is only when we acknowledge that deepest hurt, that deepest unclean part of ourselves, that God's healing can be claimed. And often those places don't have anything to do with sin. It has to do with the fact that we aren't perfect. I don't know about you, but I grew up thinking I had to be perfect. How many of us grew up knowing that was what was expected? This woman wanted healing and had spent 12 years trying to be healed. But she reaches out to Jesus that she knows the power, and when she doesn't reach out, she knows the power of God in her life. She isn't Jewish. She isn't one of his flock. She steps beyond the normal boundaries of polite behavior to claim the righteousness, the tzedek, the balance that she so desperately needed. She would not allow herself to be bound by convention. She quit living quietly in her own hell of being untouchable. To know the healing of our hidden places requires a thirst to know the balance and willingness to speak the hidden so that it no longer tyrannizes us. We have to be willing to acknowledge that we aren't perfect, and neither is anybody else. We spend so much of our time trying to cover up our imperfections rather than live the life that God has given us. Much of our lives are spent trying to cover up those icky places in our lives. Trust me, growing up lesbian in Texas in the 1950s, one gets in touch with the icky of life. But unless we are uncommonly well balanced or have had a lot of therapy, I would guess that most of us are hiding something that we don't even want to look at, and more importantly, we won't let God look at or heal. And because of it, we lose sight of the joy of living that God provides. This story helps us to see what it means to know the liberation that is part of the life of faith. It is the place of comfort. It is the place of courage. It is the place of balance. But this story isn't just about individuals. Our society has many places where we as a people avoid raising up the places where we are unbalanced until things converge, and it is often in the face of tragedy that we finally begin to see the consequences of our illness. Over the past year, we have seen increasing instances where racism has raised its ugly head in this nation. 50 years ago, Judy and I both were in Selma for the marches that can now make movies about it. And later in the summer, we'll make the pilgrimage to commemorate the death of Jonathan Myrick Daniels, our church's civil rights martyr. We find people, here we are, 50 years later, and still finding people being killed or harassed simply because of the color of their skin. We find people killed in the church. And we want open care. We find children harassed simply because they're different. And I don't care what color we are, what differences we might have. We hear discouraging and disgusting comments from those around us, and possibly even from family members, neighbors, colleagues, or other students, that are designed to diminish others because they don't belong to whatever group that is dominant. Those of us who are from minorities, however we identify, have known the exclusion and even terror of not being able to live freely in a country that supposedly, the land of liberty, is supposedly the land of liberty and the home of the brave. Even we as church, we say that radical hospitality is practiced here in this diocese. We don't ever talk about the pain that our thoughtlessness can engender. Here at St. Martin's, I don't believe we've ever had diversity training in this, the most diverse parish in our diocese. Back in the late 80s and 90s, I was a rector of a parish about the size of St. Martin's in the Washington, D.C. area. It was truly a church that was half black and half white. I use the word black advisedly here. Early in my tenure, and my deeply southern stupidity, I made the mistake of asking the four persons of color in my vestry what the black take was on a certain issue. A 6'2" African-American woman, principal of the local high school, leaned back and said, "Lauren, Toby is from Mobile, Alabama. I'm from the Bronx. Norman is from Jamaica, and Ignatius is from Nigeria. Pray tell me, which black perspective do you want?" After I wiped the egg off my face, I spent the next 10 years learning to listen to the hearts and desires of people who were so different, but who had come together to be one because of their faith. They had come together knowing that they didn't know what everybody else thought, but their faith demanded that they listen. Diversity requires the heart to listen to another, to tell the stories of our fears and our joys, and to honor the stories of one another. Here in Fort Worth, we have been so caught up with the division of our church, we have not listened to the hearts or the stories of those who are different from us, so that we can hear the call that we all have to know the healing of God's love. And how many of us who are in the majority are willing to compromise the ways that we have always done things, so that the diversity of our parish or our diocese can be seen and celebrated. Perhaps we need to be willing to talk frankly and in love about our love for God. Can you imagine Episcopalians sharing faith? And yet, we do it. And yet, in this parish, and it is rare, brothers and sisters, we have places where people do share their faith. When we aren't willing to embrace what it means to really be one, we never know the balance that righteousness, or tzedek, that Jesus offers to the woman who touched his cloak. We will also never truly be that nation that invites people from all over the world to our shores, but aren't willing to recognize that longing to be healed of the boundaries that separate us. Now, because I'm a teacher at heart, I'm going to give you some homework. I will not be grading papers, but in the end, there will be a test. Some of us are closer to that than others. I would like you each to ask yourselves, one, what needs to be healed in my life so that I don't expect others to be like me? And where do I need to reach out to Christ and allow myself to be healed of my fear? It's only when we as a faith community are willing to address those questions that we can claim the radical hospitality that we so desire and desire to offer. But God who gave Jesus the power to heal gives you the power in faith to be healed of the fears that keep you from knowing the joy of life. I'm not suggesting that you go out and shout your vulnerabilities to the world. I don't require anybody to preach on the corner. But let yourself reach out to the tassels of God's garment. And as a parish and a diocese, let us reach out, despite our brokenness, to know the joy that God holds for us. This is what the gospel